additional money that we could pave those roads and have additional money for operational in the years to come to commit to those roads. But the reality is being that we just don't have those dollars today. And I think that, you know, I know I've had to say, and I said this in the House last week, I've even had to say to people in my own area that unfortunately they shouldn't expect to see that. And I know that's not what they want to hear. They want to hear this gravel road will be paved and when can they expect it to be done. And I've actually had to say to folks that, that you know, the truth of the matter is they probably won't see it. But however, I am, you know, saying that the local area manager and the local OS do a tremendous job in regards to upgrading roads. And a lot of times the gravel road is a lot easier to maintain and to bring up to par when you look at the kind of monies and the kind of work that's required on paved roads. So, you know, I do think that that there is an opportunity to continue spending money on through RIM projects, through our RIM money, in regards to gravel roads and a lot of good those. I see the honourable members telling my time's up, so I'll look forward to discussing further in a few minutes.
Time for the honourable member has expired as well. We've reached the moment of interruption.
Order, please. Order, please. The subject for the late debate tonight was submitted by the Honourable the Leader of the Liberal Party. Therefore, be it resolved that in the wake of the collapse of the 2014 Commonwealth Games bid, government bring forward its plan for major infrastructure funding for recreation and sport in Nova Scotia. And the Honourable, the member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I wanted to speak this evening about the demise of the Commonwealth Games bid and the government's response. And again, I point to the fact that there is a tremendous opportunity before us and that we should be reviewing that. I'm sure that there are many reasons why the government wants to bury the information and put behind them the entire episode of the Commonwealth Games. But I disagree, Mr. Speaker. I believe that there's an opportunity for us to look at the lessons learned, to consider why we were so interested in chasing the Commonwealth Games in the first instance, to take the lessons learned and build from that and start to address the really serious shortcomings in our sport infrastructure in the province. And I know that there was a tremendous need, and we really learned more about it as the games were I guess abandoned. When the bid was abandoned, it was decided that it was out of our reach. We examined it. We had people come here to public accounts here in the legislature to talk to our all-party committee and really explain and provide information as to what had gone wrong and how we'd gotten into the games and why we got out and why the cost had escalated. And I think it's important again to go over the background. And really the figure that was bandied about widely in the media and in the press was $300 million coming from the province. Now yesterday in estimates, the minister told me they might have been thinking of $200 million. Up to $300 million. It wasn't determined. It was a little bit unknown, but it was quite clear that in the public's eye, it was around $300 million if it was cost shared equally from the three levels of government. And the reason we were anxious to get into that ball game, Mr. Speaker, was because there was really no major infrastructure here in our capital city or in our province to host national and international games, to help our own athletes get the skill and training that they need to compete nationally and internationally, and even to help our younger children get involved in sport. Because the city will often tell you there's a distinction between recreation and sport, and the municipality will tell you they're interested in supporting recreation but not sport. And I would beg to differ that you cannot draw a line between recreation and sport, because it begins with children taking their first swimming lessons and learning to swim and going through the basic levels, and it leads from that on to them participating in swim teams and sports and competition. And it's very difficult to say that one is not or is completely divorced from the other. And even those in the sport field will tell you that that's a very arbitrary decision to make. So I believe that all three levels of government have a role to play in providing community recreational infrastructure, which is tied into the larger sport picture. And in my current situation as the MLA for Halifax Clayton Park, I can tell you that for more than 7 years we have been talking and working in the community to look at a replacement for aging facilities that we have. And the main point I would like to make tonight in my short 10 minutes is that This is a perfect opportunity for the province, for the federal government, for the municipality to recognize that we have a major project in an area where it will have a big impact with a large number of people living nearby, where we can really make a facility that will add to that competitive and recreational infrastructure that's needed. It will help the health of our community. It will make facilities available not just to the young, who I've already spoken about, but to people my age, to seniors who need to keep active and keep well. It will really have an impact on our health, on the fitness, on the wellness, and it helps our mental health, because we have a lot of isolation in the city where people are living alone or need to get out and socialize. It offers an opportunity for fitness and social interaction. It helps on so many levels. For young people, it will help to address vandalism and youth crime, because if you have a large, dense population, as we do, surrounding the mainland common in the Fairview and in the Clayton Park riding, you'll find that there are a lot of young people and not enough facilities to serve them. And it's very important that we give children the opportunity to find out what they're good at, to explore their skills, to have the facilities to do just that. So we need to have a good centre built in that area, just as we do around the province. And yesterday, again in estimates, we talked about the demand, which I believe is in many communities. The province is going to get up shortly, and I'm sure the minister will tell us about the large commitment they have to sport. But to make a $50 million commitment, let's put it into perspective, a $50 million commitment over 10 years, $5 million a year, over 10 years, you have $50 million spread over that length of time, when only a year and a half ago, we were in this province talking about $300 million that would be spent before 2014. In 7 years, they were going to spend $300 million getting ready for this game. So it just seems to me that we're not advancing our case by the $50 million over 10 years. And we will hear from the minister, I'm sure, about how much extra has gone in this year's budget. But I wanted to read from one of the many articles that I've reviewed that have come out. They all were printed just after the demise of the games. And I think one of them said it all to me. It was from one of the opinion columns in the Daily News, which is unfortunately with us no more. I'd be happy to table this if that's a good idea. I think perhaps it is, Mr. Speaker. But in this article, it's entitled, "All's Not Lost, Let's Suck It Up and Move Forward." I think that says it all. And it says down here in this article that a consultant study that was done, and I have to find the right thing, a consultant study, here it is, quote, "A consultant's review of the Halifax bid financed by Ottawa determined," quote, "opting to have facilities built in order to host the Commonwealth Games is an extremely expensive and largely inefficient route to constructing new infrastructure." So it said, yes, we need new infrastructure in this province, but that wasn't the best way to do it, to build perhaps a stadium that isn't the biggest need for our community, that won't meet those health and fitness and recreational needs that I've just spoken about. We need the kind of facilities that are going to allow us to meet the needs of our communities first. And they were just saying, you're then dictated, if you get into a games like this where you spend the money, you're going to be dictated to so that you're meeting the needs of those games. And we'll be building for netball and building for sports that we don't play in this province. So the fact is that they were just saying very clearly that's not the most efficient way to leverage money and to get games infrastructure in place. This article goes on to say, Kelly and Barnett need to show much stronger resolve. This is a quote, Mr. Speaker. Am I allowed to quote, Mr. Speaker? No, can't quote. Okay, well, I shall say then, the Mayor and the Minister of Health Promotion and Protection, which is, I'm adding those in, need to show much stronger resolve. They should publicly insist that the Harper government proceed with a major sports infrastructure program for Nova Scotia. Atlantic Canada is the last region to receive such investment from Ottawa. Our man in cabinet must step up to the plate too. So it's calling for leadership among the political elite of this province, Mr. Speaker. It's calling for the provincial leaders to say, we have a role to play, number one. This is an opportunity that should not be missed. Where else in this province, Mr. Speaker, are you going to find 200,000 people in a 20-minute radius of a sport facility? You can be helping 20% of the province's population, and you have such a dense population in Clayton Park and Fairview that in walking distance you have the population that will support and justify the investment in that facility. You are not going to have an opportunity like this again in this generation. The last pool built in HRM was built 25 years ago, and that was the Spryfield pool. We only build pools every 25 or 30 years, so if we undersize today, we're not building for the future. So I think that the municipality particularly deserves our criticism today. I have only a minute, and I would like to squarely say that if the municipality is where the direction is coming from, as the minister has said, then they should be squarely chastised for not building and thinking correctly in terms of what our community needs and what this province needs. And if they think small, then we're all shortchanged, and that's exactly what has happened. The municipality also deserves to be chastised for having very little public consultation or participation. It's been lip service and it's been patronizing. And I frankly am very annoyed about the way we've been treated as a community, and I see other communities across the province like Bridgewater, like Liverpool, Port Hawkesbury, you can name many of them, where they've had strong public participation and they have therefore built something really spectacular. And that's not happening where we are because of small-mindedness, and I would call upon the government and the municipality to do much better as we move forward. Maybe there's a chance to seize this opportunity. Thank you very much.
The Minister of Health Promotion and Protection.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for allowing me some time to speak today on this resolution. I want to, first of all, provide some perspective with respect to the province's decision related to the Commonwealth Games. And I know the member opposite often chooses selective facts to put forward her points, but what I'd say to the member opposite is that as the minister responsible for the Commonwealth Games bid, I was very committed to winning that bid. I thought for the province it would be a good thing, for Canada it would be a good thing. It would leave behind a legacy of sport infrastructure, and we would be able to leverage money from the Government of Canada. But at the end of the day, when we did the math, the due diligence was done, the analysis was complete, a cost of $1.9 billion was out of our reach. I don't apologize to anyone for the decision that we made as a government. I recommended that to my cabinet colleagues, and I think it was the right decision to make. I've heard from many, many constituents, from my constituency and from around the municipality, who have agreed with me. I've heard from very few people who disagreed. At the end of the day, it was out of reach. We were punching above our weight. There was no way that we were able to achieve that, and the early advice received was incorrect. In order to win that bid, the cost needed to be around $2 billion. The Government of Canada committed $400 million. The province hadn't said what our commitment would be at the time, but we believed it shouldn't be greater than the Government of Canada, and the municipality was in for around $200 million. We were short $1 billion no matter how you add this up, no matter how you look at it. One of the key concerns raised during the bid process was indeed the lack of infrastructure. I made a recommendation to my colleagues in Cabinet to enhance an already existing program, a recreation facility development program, to help us accommodate some of that infrastructure gap. When I became the minister, we had a program that had capital funding of $2 million annually. We increased that capital funding to $3 million. That recreation facility development grant allowed for projects up to $150,000, $200,000, and everything from a tot lot or playground all the way up to renovations to an existing sport and recreation infrastructure. To that point in time, any large projects were done on a one-off basis, and the contribution to the Apple Dome, for example, was a year-end initiative that was done on a one-off basis, and it was a generous contribution. I'm very proud of that, and there's a community group there that understands and knows how to move forward with the project, and we'll see construction begin on that project hopefully sometime this summer. The important point, though, Mr. Speaker, I recognized and my colleagues recognized and the Premier recognized that simply wasn't enough. we developed a brand new program. It's called BFIT, Building Facilities and Infrastructure Together. We committed $5 million to last year's budget, and we committed to hold that program in place for the next 10 years, so that we would have $50 million over 10 years, and that our funding would be 1/3 funding, and that the proponents of these projects would be responsible for the other 2/3, either as government entities or as communities raising funds. So what we envisioned at the beginning was the province would have $50 million over 10 years, and the municipality, the federal government, and the other partners would come up with the other 2/3, totaling $150 million in infrastructure for our province. Now, we've been very successful. We've announced a number of projects. I spoke about them here in the House. We've seen announcements just last week, a $10 million announcement in the district of Lunenburg and Bridgewater, where the two municipalities came together to bring forward a proposal that would see the construction of a multi-purpose sport facility in that area. $30 million project. Our commitment is $10 million. Construction will begin shortly. They've identified the site. They have community leaders today out knocking on doors, raising money, doing the things that are necessary to get to that next level, to build that facility. We took that existing program because we saw and knew and understand the demands and the needs and the requirements for enhanced infrastructure, and we added to that an additional $2 million. When you take our 5, you add the 2, you do the math, it's $68 million over the next 10 years. Now, if we do the same kind of math, 2/3 funding, what we're going to see is nearly $210 million over the next 10 years for sport and recreation infrastructure, something I am extremely proud of. And, Mr. Speaker, the important point is that that's over and above, that's beyond our existing $3 million recreation facility development grants that we will continue to support so that those small but very important projects around the province get funded. Now, the member opposite speaks about her community, and she's proud of that community, such as all members are. I'm proud of my community. She indicated that the last pool built in Halifax Regional Municipality was the Captain William Spry Centre. I want to correct her on her facts, Mr. Speaker. In fact, there were other pools built since that time, and I can point to my own constituency, for example. The Sackville Sports Stadium, about 14 or 15 years ago, might be a little longer now, built a nice pool in our community. It's well used, and it serves our community very well. And I also know, as a former member of the Halifax County Council, that in Cole Harbour, a pool was built between now and 25 years ago, and I don't know the exact date, but there have been a number of pools that have been built. The important point is, Mr. Speaker, that these kinds of infrastructure are important to communities. That's why we're committed to our BFIT program. That's why we've been committed to expending money in areas that traditionally have been municipal responsibilities. We recognize the fact that municipalities today can't do it alone. They need partners. One of our key elements to helping make Nova Scotia healthy and safe is the fact that we believe that it's important to provide people places to participate in sport and recreation. In addition to the cost of being enrolled in sports, we've included a $500 tax credit for all Nova Scotians who participate in sport and recreation infrastructure. As a barrier, we also knew that infrastructure was a key component to getting people more physically active. I'll tell you, Mr. Speaker, as I travel around the province and make announcements in communities, the support for the infrastructure and this program is tremendous. I will continue to work with our municipal partners. I will continue to go around this province, make these kinds of investments, and we'll do it for the right reason. It's about making Nova Scotia the healthiest and safest province in the country. But the key difference, Mr. Speaker, between the member opposite and myself is that I believe it's absolutely fundamentally important to work with the folks who are going to own and operate these facilities, the municipalities and the community groups and organizations who will ultimately be the owners of these facilities. Because at the end of the day, they're going to be the partners that will come up with their 1/3 or 2/3. And that's why I have worked very closely, and we will continue to work very closely with all municipalities, including Halifax Regional Municipality. I have had discussions with them with respect to the facility in the member's constituency. I have gone to meet with the minister, the federal minister, regional minister, to talk about a federal contribution to the facility in the member's constituency. I have worked very closely, and my staff has worked very closely with Halifax Regional Municipality, because I believe, like she does, that that facility is necessary. Now, there is a fundamental difference. I believe working with the municipality will get better results. She believes working against the municipality will get better results. At the end of the day, only time will tell. Only time will tell. But I can tell you, in the communities that I've been to and the projects that we've announced, the approach and the path that I've taken, that we've taken as a department, has been very successful. We worked with municipalities in the Annapolis Valley to help build 47 kilometers of trail on the Sissebu River. We've worked with communities in Pictou and in New Glasgow and Trenton to develop a new indoor field house, now open. Only a year ago, they hadn't broken ground. They didn't have their money. We provided our third, they provided their two-thirds. It's open, and people are taking advantage of that infrastructure today. And we've worked with communities like the town of Windsor and the Windsor Curling Club to support their curling club. Mr. Speaker, they had a tragic incident last winter where the curling club was burnt, it was destroyed, and at the end of the day, we provided our third, they provided their two-thirds, and we were able to accommodate that curling club, and now they will be able to open next year.
Order, please. Your time has elapsed. The Honourable, the member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Yes, thank you very much. Just on a point of order, I'd like to correct the member opposite in saying that it was said that I do not work with the community or with the council, with the municipality. And in fact, that's quite the opposite. I endeavour to work with the councillors and with the council. They have shut out the community, and they are being silent with the public. So it's unfair to infer that I'm not working with the municipality. Thank you.
It's a good point. A. The Honourable, the member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am pleased to join the debate tonight because, of course, we all acknowledge it's an important topic. Let me say immediately that I and my colleagues do agree with the resolution. It starts with a reference to Commonwealth Games, which we have to leave behind us. That's over. It's done with. It's time to stop the recriminations. But the substantive part of the resolution, Mr. Speaker, talks about the need for the government to come forward with a plan for recreational facilities, and that we can certainly support. We need a plan so that everybody across this province knows where it all fits, to know what the priorities are, what the criteria are. The minister talked about the fact that when he goes to the announcements where the money is spent, that there's support for the program. Well, of course there's support, Mr. Speaker, because he's in the communities where the recreational facilities have gotten the green light and they're getting money. But on the same day, what the minister needs to do is go to the communities that have been waiting and waiting and waiting, because there he might not get such a rosy picture with respect to what the government is doing regarding recreational facilities. If the minister talks only to the people who've just had their projects approved, of course he's going to only see happy, smiling faces. Now, the example that I'm going to talk about is the same as the member for Halifax Clayton Park, because we do have adjoining constituencies, and so those are the communities that we know best. So, like the member for Halifax Clayton Park, I do want to talk tonight about the desperate need for recreational facilities to serve the western suburbs of Halifax, specifically Fairview, Clayton Park, Timberley, up really as far as the Hammonds Plains Road, which of course the minister who's just finished speaking represents. Because of the highway system, the Northwest Arm Drive and the Bicentennial Highway, it is quite easy to access the mainland commons area from quite a long distance around. Now, I have to say, Mr. Speaker, that in contrast to the member for Halifax Clayton Park, that the community that I represent is in a different situation. The community that I represent is older than Clayton Park West. It is losing its banks, it's losing its churches. The one major public institution in the Fairview neighborhood was the Halifax West High School, And where that high school sat for nearly 50 years, it's now just a vacant lot, an empty, overgrown lot, Mr. Speaker. And this community, which has lost so much to the Clayton Park area because the banks are closing in Fairview and opening up in Clayton Park. The churches are closing in Fairview and opening up new buildings in Clayton Park. The high school is now on the mainland common in Clayton Park. And so the recreational facilities that we're talking about are in this new area. The Clayton Park West is burgeoning, thriving area. But let's not forget, Mr. Speaker, the areas like the one I represent that have to a certain extent been left behind. Now, we have in our community of Fairview this amazing opportunity to take an abandoned rail line, or a rail line that CN is in the process of abandoning, and turning it into a recreational trail that connects to hundreds of kilometers of trail around the southern part of Nova Scotia. And we need to seize that opportunity and not let it slip through our fingers so that our children say to us, what happened? Why didn't we turn that into a recreational trail, Mr. Speaker? But we don't have a plan. I know the minister and his department are aware of that issue in Fairview. I know that they're aware of the opportunity, but because there is no plan, there is no context, the people in the area that I represent don't know what to expect, Mr. Speaker. They don't know who to ask, they don't know where to apply, they don't know what the criteria are. And it is the same with the facilities on the mainland commons. This burgeoning community, particularly up in Clayton Park, Mr. Speaker, is not matched by adequate recreational facilities. There is an aging pool, a very small pool, North Cliff Recreation Center, that is far past its useful life, Mr. Speaker. It needed to be replaced quite a number of years ago, Mr. Speaker, but it hasn't been replaced yet. And here, Mr. Speaker, we come to the most bizarre part of the story, and bizarre is the only word that I can use. On the mainland commons right now, Mr. Speaker, if you drove up there, you would see something being built. Something is being built up there by Halifax Regional Municipality, but they won't tell the people what it is that they're building, Mr. Speaker, and the only word for that is bizarre. I was driving with my family on Lacewood Drive, which runs past the north side of the mainland commons, and my wife said to me as we drove past, "What is it they're building over there?" And I had to say, "I don't know, because the city won't tell us." Is there a rink going up there? We don't know. Is it a pool, perhaps? We don't know. We do know that it's a field house associated with the 2011 Canada Games, but we don't know what's going to be inside it, Mr. Speaker. We don't know because the city's not telling us. That's how bizarre the story of recreational facilities on the mainland common has become, Mr. Speaker. Everybody's running scared. Now, I do, to a certain extent, agree with the minister that perhaps the city has felt itself underappreciated by the approach of some people to this particular issue. And the reason they're not telling anybody what they're doing up there is because they've been subject to so much criticism over the past number of years that now they don't want to tell anybody anything, because their feeling, I think, is that if they don't tell anybody anything, they can't be criticized for it. But it is simply bizarre, Mr. Speaker, that in the heart of this burgeoning community, something is being built, but the city won't tell the taxpayers and the citizens living around the area what it is that's going up there. Even the province seems to be running a little bit scared on this, Mr. Speaker, because the province emphasizes over and over again that it is a municipal project, which is true. But as the minister has said, there is a role here, a necessary role for all three levels of government to contribute funding. And because the province will be a key funding agency, it really has a lot of weight here, Mr. Speaker. And it seems to me that the province could open up the project, require the city not to conduct its operations in secrecy as is happening now, The province seems almost afraid to use the weight that it has as a funding agency to let the people know what's going on up there. Now, Mr. Speaker, first and foremost, the province needs to have a plan. The people of mainland North or the western suburbs of Halifax or Clayton Park or Fairview, whatever it is, whatever word you want to use to describe that area, the people of that area deserve to know when they're going to get recreational facilities that will meet the needs of their burgeoning community, and what kind of facilities they're going to get. And right now, they don't know when they're going to get something or what those facilities are going to be. I believe the minister. I accept the minister's word when he says that discussions are underway, something will be built, the federal government will be providing some money, the province will be providing some money, the city will be providing some money. But what we need, Mr. Speaker, what the people of that area need, what the people of the province need, is some sense of the plan. What is going to be built in Bridgewater and when? What is going to be built in Amherst and when? What is going to be built in Port Hawkesbury or Sydney or Yarmouth or Kentville and when? And it is that piece that is missing from the provincial government's plan, Mr. Speaker. So with those words, let me conclude by saying that we support the motion proposed by the member for Halifax Clayton Park, and we encourage the minister to come forward as quickly as possible with the answer to the questions that the people of mainland North are asking. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
We will now take a short recess while the minister and others get in and get prepared for the remaining time and estimates.
Murray. Order, please. We'll now resume with the estimates, and I'll recognize the honourable member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, when I left the debate on the department's estimate last, I was speaking and asking questions on different projects along Highway 101. So I want to continue where I left off. I was speaking on finishing Highway 101 between Digby and Weymouth North. Mr. Chair, in our speech from the throne that was delivered by Her Honour back on November 22nd, 2007, I quote, "We will improve our road system through a program to twin and modernize highways from Yarmouth to Sydney by 2020. Again, Mr. Chair, as I've indicated earlier, the people of Digby County, and especially the people living between Digby and Weymouth North, would have liked to hear in the speech from the throne, instead of talking about twinning the highways from Sydney to Yarmouth by 2020, was for government to announce when the missing section of Highway 101 between Digby and Weymouth would be completed. So I hope before long that the government will undertake to inform the people, especially the folks that are living along that stretch of highway between Weymouth and Digby, when government is planning to complete that missing section of Highway 101. Mr. Chair, I want to again continue along Highway 101. Back in May of 2007, at a public meeting in Yarmouth that was organized by the staff of the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal, There were several proposed changes that were presented at that meeting, and one of them was a connector road between Highway 101 and Highway 103. So my question to the minister, has there been any further discussion on this proposal? Let's begin with that one.
Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank the member opposite for the question. Yes, the public meeting did bring forth some interesting information for the department. I know there's assessment being done of that information, and that'll go into helping us when it comes to designing that section. I do want to say that the Premier's commitment of twinning or modernizing our highways from Sydney to Yarmouth by 2020 does include that project the honourable member is bringing forward here today. That will be part of our overall plan. And again, all I can say tonight is that you know, the information we've received will make up part of the go ahead or go forward on this in regards to design. And again, the department is looking at the design now. I'm not sure how detailed it is at this point, but it is in the process of moving forward. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'll ask the page to provide the minister with a copy of the article and the design that was made public at that public meeting in Yarmouth. I guess my my next question to the minister, is the department considering at this time to go forward with such a proposal? And if so, could the minister indicate, you know, are we looking at next year and next 5 years? Thank you.
The Honourable the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank the member opposite. I'm sure, and I know the member opposite will appreciate that, you know, with the work that we're presently doing through the department on 125, 104, and 101. We talked here today about doing work on 103, and obviously the work that the honourable member is talking about here tonight. There's a tremendous amount of work being done in this province today in regards to highways, and we made a commitment, the Premier's made a commitment in regards to twinning and modernizing our highways, and I can tell the honourable member that many of these projects are underway now. Some of them are in the process of acquiring the land in some areas. Some areas we're doing environmental assessments. Some areas we're actually they're doing grading. Some other areas we're actually they're doing paving this year. So there are various stages throughout, but there's a tremendous amount of work right across this province in regards to modernizing our highways and upgrading and twinning. And as I said earlier, this is certainly part of our plan, and it is part of our plan for the future. But I cannot give the member a specific date tonight as when we expect it to move to the next stage, because as I said, there's a commitment, particularly in the 101, those projects that we talked about earlier tonight that are in various stages that are moving forward. We want to complete those. We want to continue working down through the 101, and as we mentioned earlier as well, some of those will mean passing lanes, which will be rolling out in the near future. So, although there's various sections and various stages right now, there's a tremendous amount of work going on, a huge commitment from the province and the federal government in regards to monies. And I will say that this project the member talks about tonight is part of it, but I can't give a specific date as to when to expect to see work on that part.
The Honourable Member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the information the minister is providing. I'm sure within this department there are many projects on table, looking for funding or looking to further be advanced. I was just curious when I read this, and there were a couple people from my area that raised questions with me. If you know, again, when the government was looking, of course, when they saw the article, and some people from home did actually attend that meeting, of course, assuming right away that highway was going to be built in the very near future. So that, you know, that's understandable. So again, I would indicate to the minister, certainly there's a lot of people, not necessarily just living in Digby County, but arriving or heading towards Yarmouth on the 101 and branching off on the 103. And if at some point the department is looking at putting a connector road between those two 100 series highways, I'm quite sure the motorists would certainly appreciate that effort. Again, Mr. Chair, I want to move on to another topic along Highway 101, and it's about the carpool parking lots. Mr. Chair, there's a number of carpool parking lots along Highway 101 when you leave Bedford right into Yarmouth along the way. In Clare, Mr. Chair, the department has constructed several of these carpool parking lots. I can tell the minister that motorists are very grateful, very pleased with the work carried out by your department staff. In Clare, there's two of them. They're located at both at the far end of our municipality. One is at exit 28 in St. Bernard, and the other one is at exit 31 at the St. Martin Metegan exit. Unfortunately, this winter, during one of our snowstorms, motorists could not park their vehicle in those carpool parking lots. They had to find somewhere else to park that day. And again, I've heard from a few of those individuals. What they fail to understand, Minister, is why can't those parking lots be plowed at the same time the snow plow goes by? I understand the department's policy is to plow these lots when all the roads have been cleared. Minister, I would say for the sake of a few minutes, because we're not looking at a very large parking area, for the sake of a few minutes, I would hope that the department would review its policy and reconsider plowing these lots at the same time when the plows are going by. For motorists, expecting people that are carpooling, and especially on those mornings when the weather is not too promising at the time, for those individuals to arrive to park their vehicle and find that they're unable to enter these parking lots and they have to either park along the highway, which certainly makes it more difficult, especially for the snowplow operators, to clear the snow, because they're planning to leave their vehicles around those exits and get in with some of their friends in order to either go to Yarmouth to work or go to Digby to work. So I would like to ask the minister if he's prepared to take this concern back to his department to review the department's policy, like I said, for the sake of a few minutes, to make some of these motorists unhappy, and at the same time to leave their vehicles alongside the road, to certainly create more problems for the snowplow operators. I don't think one situation to leave these parking lots till when all the roads are clear to come back certainly creates other problems, especially for the snowplow operators. So I would ask the minister if he'll take it back and to his department to review this policy.
The Honourable the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank the member opposite for the concern. Certainly I'll discuss that within the department in regards to the issue the honourable member brings forward. I think carpooling is a great way for a lot of individuals to organize themselves for work and other things, and I think that's a great way to save on gas and money as well. So I think they are a tremendous asset throughout the province, and I appreciate the honourable members' comments about the department and the great work they do in that regard. I will just say that it reminds me of the way that the department would prioritise ploughing roads in the province. A lot of people kind of question why the main highway would be ploughed, and they say the plow goes right by their secondary road, and why don't they come in and just plow that out? They're going by anyway, it only take a few minutes, but I always tell them that it doesn't make much sense if they can get out of their secondary road and the main highway is not plowed anyway, there's not much point in them getting out to that road. So, but I do appreciate the members' concern, and I'm sure it's probably the same case here, that they prioritize the roads, try to open the main highways first, and then on down to the secondary roads and then the local roads. So, but I will pass that along to the department on behalf of the honourable member and see if there's anything that can be done in that regard. Thank you.
Honourable member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank the member for the minister for undertaking to take it back. Mr. Chair, I'll ask one of the page to bring a copy of this letter to the minister. Again, on these carpool parking lots, Mr. Chair, a number of years ago, I was told by a former Minister of Transportation, Ron Russell, at the time, a couple of years back, that the department was working on developing a policy that would deal with the design and the maintenance service of these carpool parking lots. My question to the minister is, has the department completed in developing a policy for carpool parking lots?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the member opposite. It's my understanding that the review was complete, but I'll endeavour to get that information provided to the honourable members. I don't have it right at my fingertips right now. Thank you.
The Honourable member for Clare.
Thank you. I have one other area before I leave Highway 101, and it's about the service road along Highway 101. We see these roads, Mr. Chair, along Highway 101 to allow property owners to use the service road to access their properties, their woodlot along Highway 101. But I've received a few calls, especially in the last year, about the condition of this service road. Sometimes there's, I'll say, real big holes on the service road that's been created by tractors, by tree farmers, by wood harvesters. Or sometimes there's areas where the ditches along the service roads are plugged and the water is just running on the road. There's other areas where there's no ditches or culverts, and the water gathers in certain spots, certain areas, especially at the foot of a hill, and you basically have these small ponds. It's a very muddy area. I guess my first question to the minister is, what is the department policy on maintaining these service roads?
Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the member opposite for the question. The policy around service roads or access roads is that the department provides very minimal service year-round to those. In fact, in the summertime, there will be some graveling and some grading of those roads. There will be no winter maintenance of those roads. In other words, there's no plowing in the winter. Those roads were originally constructed to allow individuals who own property along highways that were developed, that had controlled access, to have access to their lands. So there's very minimal amount of service that's provided to those throughout the year, and especially there's none in the winter. I know it's an issue that I've heard in my own area, and have been approached by individuals about access roads and what was the intention of the government back when they were developed. But I've asked the department as well that we are going to take a look at these access roads throughout the province. But at this point in time, very minimal service, and particularly just mainly gravel and grading in the summertime.
Honourable member for Clare.
Thank you again to the minister. The fact there's sometimes grading that's carried out, I'm just wondering, is there any budget allocation set aside for maintaining these service roads at the local level, or is it at the regional level? I guess what I'm trying to find out is when there are concerns, these concerns should be brought to whose attention? Is it the local office supervisor, or is it to the regional area manager?
Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One moment. there's no specific budget, no line item, no specific budget for servicing of for service along service roads or access roads. The local area supervisor would have a summer maintenance budget, as all would across the province, and those that have access roads in their area would be expected to deal with that in their existing budget. Again, it's very minimal amount of service, so I don't think it'd be a huge item for a lot of them, but however, they would be expected to take that out of their normal summer maintenance budget.
The honourable member for Clare.
You know, again, Mr. Chair, I think some of these property owners have been told, well, these roads have a tractor standard. You know, we're getting close. I guess with that, Mr. Chair, I'll move that we adjourn the debate on the minister's estimates and return to a future day. Thank you.
Order, please. The time allotted for debate in Committee on Supply has expired. I'll now recognize the Acting Deputy Government House Leader, the Honourable Member for Eastern Shore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move that the committee does now rise and report progress.
Is it agreed?
The Chair of the Committee of the Whole House on Supply reports.
The committee's met and made progress and begs leave to sit again.
The Honourable the Government Deputy House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would you please call public bills for second reading?
Public bills for second reading.
Thank you. Would you please call Bill number 157, the Financial Measures Act?
Bill 157, the Financial Measures Act. The Honourable the Member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. When I left off on this bill the other day, I was going through the bill essentially section by section, which we don't normally do on second reading, but it's like most omnibus bills, Mr. Speaker. There is no common theme. There are a whole lot of provisions that are not related to each other, except that they have some connection, direct or indirect, to the budget. The Financial Measures Act is supposed to be all the statutory changes that are made necessary as a result of the budget that has been delivered, Mr. Speaker. And this year, I'm pleased to say that that is more or less the case. In other years, we've had situations where little bomblets get dropped in the Financial Measures Act. Things that aren't referred to in any way in the budget get dropped into the Financial Measures Act. The same thing is going on in Ottawa right now, of course, Mr. Speaker, where a very controversial provision dealing with immigration matters has been dropped into the equivalent of our Financial Measures Act. And the idea, I think, Mr. Speaker, is that if it's in the Financial Measures Act, it can't be defeated without defeating the government. So I'm pleased to see at least that the government has not done that in this Financial Measures Act. Now, where I left off, Mr. Speaker, was sort of going through and totaling up the things in the Act, some of which are good, some of which are certainly not so good. And I was in the getting towards the end of the bill, and we get to more provisions that raise fees, because let's never forget that an essential part of the budget that the government is proposing to the House and to the people of Nova Scotia is another across-the-board increase in user fees for people who go to their government seeking some kind of service. And that is to for all practical purposes, Mr. Speaker, it is another across-the-board tax increase. Just like the higher tax on electricity is an across-the-board tax increase of nearly $100 per year for every single household in Nova Scotia, every single household that receives an electricity bill, which is needless to say, Mr. Speaker, virtually every household in the province. So then, Mr. Speaker, we come to the end of the Financial Measures Act. It is interesting to me, Mr. Speaker, that what is probably the centerpiece of this budget is nowhere to be found in the Financial Measures Act, and that is the increase in the tax on electricity. because the way the government works these days, there's so much that can be done by regulation, so much that can be done by policy, that I don't think it was even necessary for the government to pass legislation in order to offer rebate in the first place. So now that the rebate is being removed, thus having the effect of increasing taxes, there is no legislative provision necessary. And so the centerpiece of the budget is, in effect, not before the House in the Financial Measures Act, Mr. Speaker. But we believe, Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, that on balance, the budget is not something we can support, and therefore we also cannot support the Financial Measures Act, which is an integral part of the budget. The Appropriations Act and the Financial Measures Act together, Mr. Speaker, are what are commonly referred to as the budget of the province. So we will not be able to support the Financial Measures Act on second reading. Earlier today, Mr. Speaker, I was talking to a senior in Fairview. She willingly volunteered the information that she was 79 years old, and she also told me that her income is low enough that she receives the old age supplement. And she called my office this morning, Mr. Speaker, and I got the message here and called her back from the phones that are just out back of the chamber here, Mr. Speaker, and she told me the essential message she wanted to convey to me was how upset she was by the budget, and she said she does not feel that the Premier understands the challenges that she is facing just trying to get by. And based on what she has read about the budget, Mr. Speaker, she urged me this afternoon not to support it. And so I was able to tell her that indeed, Mr. Speaker, that was a decision that we had already taken, that we would not be supporting the budget. We don't believe it is right for the people of Nova Scotia. Now, needless to say, Mr. Speaker, in a budget of $8.3 billion, there are some good things. And when I spoke on this act the other day, I tried to tally up the things that we liked, the things that we didn't like. Naturally, when you're spending $8.3 billion, Mr. Speaker, you can't spend every one of those dollars in a way that's not good for people. So there are some positive things. But our job here, Mr. Speaker, is to decide how to use the one vote we get. We get one vote on the whole package. We vote yes to the whole package or no to the whole package. Part of responsible government is that we don't get what some people call a line item veto, where we get to accept this piece of the budget, but we vote against that piece of the budget. We like this over here, we don't like that over there. We get one vote, yes to the whole budget or no to the whole budget. And we believe, Mr. Speaker, on balance, after examining the budget, after the discussion that's taken place over the past number of days here in this chamber and in the Red Room, we believe, after hearing from the people who sent us here, that on balance, this budget represents the wrong direction for the province, the wrong direction for the people of the province. It represents, Mr. Speaker, the view of the people who elected us, that they do not want us, their representatives, to send the signal that we believe that this is the right direction for the province, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, for myself, for my colleagues, on behalf of all the people in the constituencies that we represent, Mr. Speaker, and I must say, a lot of people in constituencies that we don't represent, Mr. Speaker, I will say that this is not a direction that we can support. This is not a budget that we can support, and we will be voting against the Financial Measures Act on second reading. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable, the member for Richmond.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise in my place this evening to speak on the Financial Measures Act. It has been a couple of sessions since I've had the privilege of speaking on the Financial Measures Act, as I was at one point during my career finance critic for our caucus, but that has been taken over very ably, I must say, by my colleague from Halifax Clayton Park, who brings a career and a background in finance and a much greater understanding than my own, and I'll be the first to admit that. But it's a well, she's presently occupied doing business of the House in law amendments, and so I've been asked to make a number of remarks on the Financial Measures Act. As has been mentioned, Mr. Speaker, the Financial Measures Act is the tool, the legislative tool, which is put in place to make a reality a number of the items which have been introduced in the budget. And naturally, you heard the critic for the NDP say we're voting against the budget, so that means we vote against the Financial Measures Act. Well, I guess in our case, it's a bit of the reverse in saying that if we're going to support the budget, that means that we would be supporting the Financial Measures Act as well, barring any changes. But at this point in time, certainly it would be our intention. You know, Mr. Speaker, it's always a difficult decision when one is trying to make a final decision on giving support to the government or not. The tendency of Nova Scotians, and ever since I've been elected in 1998, first being elected in a minority government, is that Nova Scotians have been sending the message quite strongly to us that they do expect us to put partisan politics aside and put the best interests of Nova Scotians first. And we have done our best as a party to be able to strike that balance between being able to fight for our constituents while at the same time realizing the political reality that we have here in Nova Scotia and trying to make minority government work. And I can say, Mr. Speaker, having had the opportunity to be interim leader of the Liberal caucus, I did enjoy my time of being able to work closely with the Premier, with the Minister of Finance, and with numerous other members of the government, and being able to make sure that there was a balance that was struck between what the priorities of the government were, while at the same time hearing exactly the concerns that we had and some of the very innovative proposals which we were bringing forward as a Liberal caucus. And Mr. Speaker, when one looks at the, I'd love to get that on record, but Speaker, when one looks at the Financial Measures Act, there are a number of initiatives which one can clearly identify as Liberal-sponsored initiatives, which we have been pushing for. And again, Mr. Speaker, it's, as I mentioned, it's important to be able to put politics aside, and when one is pushing for and putting forward an idea which is in the best interest of Nova Scotians, then government should be willing to look at that. And I think in a number of ways, this current government has been willing to do that, and obviously we'd like to see them go much further on a number of other initiatives, which I believe you've seen debated during this session, and certainly during the estimates, a number of my colleagues have brought forward a number of constructive suggestions to ministers, which I do hope the ministers will take seriously and will be able to bring forward some of the changes that are going to be recommended. Mr. Speaker, when one looks at the Financial Measures Act, which allows the budget to become a reality, one reflects on the items which are brought forward in the budget itself, and certainly when one looks at the emphasis there is on post-secondary education. Mr. Speaker, this is an item which our caucus has spoken so passionately about in the last number of sessions between our education critic, the Honourable Mayor from Kings West, and all of our members. We've talked about the need to support our university students. Mr. Speaker, when I first arrived here as an elected member, I just recently graduated from university and certainly was in a position to be able to share with my colleagues the financial burden being faced by students in Nova Scotia. And back then, back in 1998, Mr. Speaker, I thought it was quite an overwhelming burden that I myself had student loans in the range of $35,000. Now, Mr. Speaker, when I share that story to students graduating today, they laugh because $35,000 is not much compared to today, 10 years later from when I was first elected. But, Mr. Speaker, I had the opportunity to sit around the cabinet table for a brief period of time, and I tried to emphasize to my colleagues that at the time I was actually paying more on my student loans than I was on my mortgage for my home in Arishack. And I think that's very telling. It was telling back then 10 years ago, and I think it's still telling now of some of the financial burden being faced by our students, and something had to be done. And I think governments of all political stripes have been trying to find ways of making post-secondary education more affordable. Because at the end of the day, if our province is going to be able to move forward, is going to be able to be economically sustainable, that we're going to be able to see our province continue to grow, it is with an educated workforce, and it is with allowing as many Nova Scotians as possible to attend university. That's why when we see in the budget the needs-based grants that have been established by the government. It is an important first step because, Mr. Speaker, again, looking at a bit of history, my first year of university, way back in 1991, was the last year that the province of Nova Scotia still offered a non-repayable grant to Nova Scotia University students. After that, it went to a full loan system, and there was no longer a grant portion to the student loan. So it's good to see 10 years later that we're seeing these needs-based grants returning to Nova Scotia, which will be a tremendous benefit to Nova Scotia students and will reduce the financial burden because, Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned before, I'm certainly not someone with a very strong financial background, but it doesn't take a great knowledge of finance to know that if your 25 to 35-year-olds are burdened and saddled with debt, they're not spending money. They're not buying homes, they're not buying cars, they're not going on vacations, they're not spending the way we need them to spend for our economy to be strong. So the more we can reduce the financial burden on that age group, which is attending university or attending community college, the more money they're going to be able to spend, which is going to spur our economy, which is going to be good for our province. And I don't think it certainly doesn't take an economist to be able to figure that out. So obviously, the government has made some steps towards allowing that to become a bit of a reality. Mr. Speaker, one of the other items that the Financial Measures Act is implement the doubling of the graduate tax credit. Now, Mr. Speaker, where does this tax credit come from? Back in the 2006 election, it was our party that advocated for a strong graduate tax credit in Nova Scotia to help remove or lessen the tax burden on Nova Scotia students upon graduation who remained here in Nova Scotia. So there's a number of elements to that program. The idea was to reduce some of the financial burden, but also reward students who stayed here in Nova Scotia. Now, obviously, Mr. Speaker, if one looks back at the plan we proposed, it was much more generous than what we are seeing here in this budget. But last budget, it was a start when we saw the government implement a $1,000 tax credit. This year, the government has continued on that road by doubling it to $2,000. Now, naturally, our caucus would encourage the government to keep moving in that direction, to not only, as I mentioned, remove the financial burden on graduating students, but as well reward them for staying here in Nova Scotia, which is where we want as many of our graduates to be able to stay. But again, there's much more that needs to be done in that regard, Mr. Speaker, but we're obviously moving in that direction. Mr. Speaker, as well, the freeze on tuition. The Premier is well aware, and our caucus has certainly been very vocal in talking about the fact that it was unsustainable for our province to have such high tuitions, which were clearly out of sync with the rest of Canada. The fact that Nova Scotia, which we are so proud in saying that we have the highest, I still believe we have this, the highest per capita universities of any province in Nova Scotia, we also had the distinction of being the most expensive tuition in the country. I think the first distinction is one we're proud of. The second one, nobody was proud of. And so the question was, what can we do? And we're certainly pleased to see in this budget and through the Financial Measures Act that the Premier has indicated, and with the support, I'm sure, and the leadership of the Minister of Education, a need to bring tuition more in line with the national average. Now, we'd always love to see it lower than what it is, but certainly bringing us in line with the national average will put us on a more level playing field. And it was very concerning for me, Mr. Speaker, when I had some of my own constituents who were graduating and saying, we're going to Memorial University because it's this much cheaper than going to Nova Scotia, or we're going to Montreal, or we're going to universities in Ontario because of the fact it was much cheaper than it was here in Nova Scotia. Speaker, that is certainly not a situation that we wanted to see continue, and obviously bringing tuition closer to the national average is an important mark for the government to try to achieve. We would hope that under ideal circumstances, the government would try to make sure that our tuition is lower than the national average. But obviously there are financial pressures in making that a reality, but one would hope that the government would keep that in mind as well. Speaker, one of the other changes that the budget through the Financial Measures Act is also making a reality is the proposal which was lobbied for by our education critic, the member from Kings West, which will now allow students to be entering grade primary earlier than what they were before. The old rule, Mr. Speaker, was that if you did not turn 5 years of age before September 30th, you had to wait till the next school year to be able to start school. We've now moved that, and the government has agreed to move that date to December 31st, which is more along the lines of the national average. Now, obviously, Mr. Speaker, to make that change, there was a financial commitment to be able to do that. We were certainly pleased to hear in last year's throne speech that the government was going to make this a reality, and now this year's budget is going to make that happen. And Mr. Speaker, I want to again take the opportunity to commend my colleague from King's West, who's a career educator, career administrator in education, to have brought this forward, which to date we have heard nothing but good reviews from Nova Scotia parents as far as making this change. It was the right thing to do. It was something that we've put forward as a positive recommendation, and we're certainly pleased that the Premier and the Minister of Education, the government, has adopted this proposal and has put the amount of money necessary in the education system to make this a reality during this year. Mr. Speaker, the government had initially introduced, I believe last year, was a tax credit for families, so that their children who are going into sports, that the families would be able to have a tax credit in recognition of the high cost of enrolling children into sports. Speaker, our caucus, and under the leadership of our leader, the honourable member for Annapolis, said that that's a good start, but we need to go further. Because while we continue to talk, and we were the caucus as well, Mr. Speaker, just for history's sake, that pushed for a Department of Seniors, to have a minister solely responsible to be the voice of seniors in Nova Scotia. We were the party that talked about having a tax credit for seniors who wanted to enter into recreational type programs. And Mr. Speaker, when I look back at my own riding, I remember I have a gentleman, Simon Jim Sampson from Lardwest. Simon Jim is a veteran in his 90s now. I can't remember a specific age, so I'm just going to say in his 90s. But Simon Jim was going to the local gym in St. Peter's on almost a daily basis. So here was a veteran who fought for our country, put his life at risk, and into his 90s was still going to the gym to work out on almost a daily basis. And yet, unfortunately, when we appealed to the Department of Veterans Affairs to give him some form of credit or to cover his gym fees, the Department of Veterans Affairs said no. Which was a shame. It truly was a shame, because while both provincial and federal governments talk about our seniors being more active, having a healthy living, here was a shining example, and yet the federal government turned their backs on Simon Jim. But fortunately, in this budget, Mr. Speaker, Simon Jim and so many other seniors and all families and all individuals in Nova Scotia will now be able to take advantage of a tax credit for the fees they pay to enter into recreational type programs. Mr. Speaker, this certainly falls into the line of talking about healthy living for Nova Scotia, the need to have better exercise, to be more active, and the fact that the government has started with this credit that would apply across the board is certainly something which our party was willing to endorse. And we would encourage the government, because to look at the cost of registering, whether it's a gym membership or registering into sporting activities, it continues to rise. And while this tax credit, my understanding is it's at $500 right now, we may have to look at that very soon, at increasing that tax credit in recognition of the fact that the costs are going up and that Nova Scotians are becoming more and more active. And when one looks at the amount of activities and recreation programs families can be involved in, it certainly can well exceed that $500 tax credit, and certainly we hope that the government will be willing to look at that as well. Mr. Speaker, as well in the Financial Measures Act, I do note as well.
Order, please. The chatter is getting a little loud. The Honourable Member for Richmond has the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As I was mentioning, in the Financial Measures Act, we also see the legislative changes to the Healthy Living Tax Credit, and to not the Healthy Living Tax, but as well the Public Transit Tax Credit, which, Mr. Speaker, you will well recall that my colleague, the member for Halifax Clayton Park, has been advocating for quite some time in recognition of the fact that many people here in Metro Halifax are able to take advantage of the transit system. Now, Mr. Speaker, we know that earlier today, in the letters that were sent out by the Premier to a number of publications, he sought to clarify his definition of what a transit system was. And it actually made the news tonight, Mr. Speaker, and I know that the member for Cape Breton Nova actually was there as well, trying to explain what exactly the meaning of transit systems were. But, Mr. Speaker, let me say, to try to be positive during my remarks, that I'm very pleased that not in the Financial Measures Act, but as part of the planning that the government has announced of their spending, that the government has put the money into investing into the Strait Area Transit, which will finally provide public transportation for residents of the Strait Area, especially those with mobility issues, with disabilities, who up till now had absolutely no option for public transit at all in that area. And I do wish to commend the Premier and my colleagues from the Strait Area, who are all very supportive of this initiative, and we look forward to seeing those buses and those vans on the road in the Strait Area to be able to provide that need. So maybe down the road, the Premier will be able to say to the residents of the Strait Area, take the bus, but today, there's no bus for the residents of the Strait Area to take, but it may be getting better down the road because of that investment. So I will turn the criticism a bit into a positive by saying there is good news coming for the residents of the Strait Area. But I have to tell you, Mr. Speaker, they have been working on that project for many, many years. And so we're pleased to see that finally that project is becoming a reality, and will certainly go a long ways towards helping the residents of the Strait Area. And while at this point in time it is not clear, Mr. Speaker, what fees will be charged for the Strait Area
Order,
Transit.
please. Order. The Honourable Member for Richmond has the floor.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As I was saying, it's not quite clear yet what the fees will be for the Strait Area Transit Authority once it's up and running, but quite possibly residents of the Strait Area may be able to benefit from this public tax credit as well, should there be fees, because I would assume that the fees charged would be eligible for this tax credit for the residents of the Strait Area. Mr. Speaker, as well, through the Financial Measures Act, we see once again two major items when it relates to volunteer firefighters. We see once again the second phase of the increase for the tax credit. And I want to take this opportunity to commend my colleague from Clare, who has been advocating and brought in legislation towards a volunteer tax credit. Now, at first, the legislation which was being proposed by my colleague from Clare was a $500 tax credit right off the bat. Now, last year, Mr. Speaker, it became clear that the government indicated that financially they could not afford to do $500 in one shot. So instead, the government said last year that they would start with $250. I believe this year it's moving to $375, and next year it will reach the $500. So, Mr. Speaker, that is a tremendous acknowledgement of volunteer firefighters, the work that they do, the sacrifices that they make, the fact that they provide safety to all of our communities, and they do so with very little compensation. It's important as legislators that we do whatever we can to reward them, because, Mr. Speaker, my community, like so many other communities, is suffering from a lack of volunteer firefighters in many rural communities, and we need to make sure that we do whatever we can to encourage individuals to become volunteer firefighters. But the budget and the Financial Measures Act goes even further, Mr. Speaker, because not only are we recognizing volunteer firefighters, as well, the government has extended this to ground search and rescue individuals as well. Now, Mr. Speaker, I don't have the numbers in front of me, and maybe the Minister of Finance or others in the government can provide them, but from my own experience, most of the members of the ground search and rescue team were also volunteer firefighters. They tended to be the same individuals who were doing both jobs. But there may be individuals who are simply or exclusively ground search and rescue individuals and not volunteer firefighters. That might be, and I don't have those numbers, but obviously, regardless of what those numbers are, extending that tax credit to ground search and rescue is common sense. A bit of the common sense which I wish the Minister of Justice would use more often when it comes to correctional officers, but it's common sense just the same, Speaker. So hopefully the Minister of Justice will apply a bit more the common sense that we see from the government in some of the items involved in the Financial Measures Act. Mr. Speaker, as well, our caucus was quite vocal to the government after hearing representations from the film industry in Nova Scotia. And the film industry in Nova Scotia has had its highs and lows, and we are constantly in competition with other jurisdictions. I was pleased the other day, Mr. Speaker, to drive on Lower Water Street, and at one point I noticed that it was almost the sand or dirt that was on the pave, and I wasn't quite sure what the Minister of Transportation was doing to our roads at that point on Lower Water Street, but only upon driving a little further to see that it was actually a movie set that was on the waterfront filming a movie. So while I was getting ready to send an email off to the Minister of Transportation to lament the state of Lower Water Street in Halifax, I was pleased to see it was only temporary dirt that was put on the road as part of the movie set that was there. But, Mr. Speaker, we are in constant competition from other Canadian provinces who continue to increase the film tax credit. And obviously, with the high Canadian dollar, it presents an even greater challenge for us to attract movie productions, because the lower Canadian dollar was so attractive to producers from the United States to come and film here in Nova Scotia. But with the high dollar, it makes it that much more of a challenge. So we're certainly pleased with the representations that have been made by our caucus and certainly by the leader of the Liberal Party in calling upon the government to increase the film tax credit, that the government has listened. And through the Financial Measures Act, we are able to see an increase once again in the film tax credit. And unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, we may have to increase it again, because it's a bit of a bidding war that is taking place throughout Canada, and we have to make sure that Nova Scotia is keeping pace with the rest of the other provinces, because we do have a tremendous infrastructure that exists here in Nova Scotia for film productions. We've had a number of films that have been taped here in Nova Scotia, which are proof that how strong our industry is, how marketable our province is. But at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, these films come down to cost, and it's the cost of production. And as these film tax credits can assist in doing that, then certainly, Mr. Speaker, it's something that we should keep pursuing. And I know that the Minister of Economic Development has introduced legislation to change the name of the Nova Scotia Film Development Corporation to simply Film Nova Scotia, which certainly, if that helps, Mr. Speaker, in marketing our industry here, then so be it. We certainly will have no issues in supporting that type of legislation and seeing that industry grow, because like so many other industries, Mr. Speaker, any money that is brought in from Film Development Nova Scotia provides support to so many other industries and so many other service industries in Nova Scotia that it is in our best interest to be able to see that continue as well. Mr. Speaker, as well, we see in the Financial Measures Act some of the legislative changes to address some of the changes that have been proposed through discussions with the municipalities through the Municipal Governments Act. Through this bill, we are going to see where the minister is starting to phase out the cost of corrections and housing from municipalities in Nova Scotia. So, Speaker, all municipal units in our province are trying to address some of the needs that are facing them. We see some of the higher requirements for water quality, for wastewater quality, and as a result of that is placing a larger financial burden on the municipalities throughout Nova Scotia. But, Mr. Speaker, as well, I want to take this opportunity to encourage the Minister of Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations and the Premier and all of government to try to shake their federal counterparts into announcing more programs under the Canada Building Fund, or the Building Canada Fund is what it's called. Because, Mr. Speaker, I'm aware of 2 major projects in Richmond County which are currently in that system, which we have not heard any news about. One is the replacement of the Evanston wastewater treatment plant, and the other is the replacement of the lift stations in Arishat for that treatment plant. Mr. Speaker, to date, we have had no news, and in fact, all indication seems to be the only announcements that we've seen have been in the writings of either the Minister of National Defence or the Parliamentary Secretary who represents the South Shore, Chester St. Margaret's, I believe, all of those writings. But, Mr. Speaker, we've got a whole big province here that doesn't fall within those 2 members. And to date, it doesn't seem like we're seeing announcements in other areas of this province. And Mr. Speaker, municipalities should not be punished due to politics by either the federal government or the provincial government. And I do understand that the federal government needs to come on side, but the provincial government is a partner in this, and they should have a say. And I do encourage the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia Municipal Relations to exert whatever influence that he can when he's not too busy setting the price of gas on a weekly basis for Nova Scotians. Making sure that taxes continue to be the highest mode of fuel taxes in the country. But when he's not too busy doing that, Mr. Speaker, I would encourage him to make sure that he exerts whatever influence, whether he needs to speak as well to the Minister of Community Services, to encourage our two federal members in the provincial government and the federal government to make sure that these specific projects are being approved so that the municipalities are able to meet the standards, ironically, which are being set both by the federal government and by the provincial government when it comes to water quality and wastewater quality. And Mr. Speaker, we've heard the complaints that have come from the municipal governments as the fact that the government in the past has downloaded more and more to them. So we're pleased that through the Financial Measures Act that they are able to provide some relief to the municipalities. And I know we've heard complaints from the municipalities as well about the cap there is on assessments. The municipalities feel that that's taking revenue away from them. But Mr. Speaker, I voted in favor of that cap, and I'm proud to say that our whole caucus voted in favor of that cap, because it just wasn't realistic to continue to have Nova Scotians being faced with annual increases which were well beyond their financial means. But in doing so, it placed a burden on the municipalities to be able, in their collection of funds. Some have indicated they've had to increase the taxes. I'm pleased to say my own municipality did not increase their basic tax rate, but as one councillor pointed out, the fact that the assessments did go up means more revenue. So while it's not a tax increase, they are bringing in more revenue at the end of the day. So, Mr. Speaker, whatever we can do to assist our municipal units be able to meet some of the challenges that they are faced with through the changes that have been made in this legislature are certainly something that we would support. Mr. Speaker, in the budget itself, which the Financial Measures Act reflects, I look at the in-home support program, and I don't know what the government calls it today, but it'll always, to me, be the in-home support program. I think it's now called Support for Seniors program. But Mr. Speaker, this was an important first step at bringing back support to caregivers through direct financial assistance. Now, Mr. Speaker, this is something that I personally have been pushing for since the government of John Hamm froze this program in 2000. Because, Mr. Speaker, how unfair a situation did we have where the program, when it was frozen, said that any families receiving benefits would continue to receive benefits, but no new applications would be permitted. So you had situations, Mr. Speaker, in my own riding, where one household was getting financial assistance to care for their loved ones at home, and next door, which was doing the exact same thing, wasn't permitted because they did not apply before the year 2000. So last year, finally, the government did agree, with the urging of the Liberal caucus, to implement a pilot project to see how can we bring this program back. And the pilot project was in two areas of the province, Cape Breton area and the South Shore. But Mr. Speaker, with all good intentions, the program did not achieve the results it was meant to achieve. Those who were responsible for the program looked at it and said, let's start off by offering it to people, families who have loved ones who are on the waiting list. Mr. Speaker, as I've said many times, the whole idea of that program was to keep individuals from having to go on the waiting list for nursing homes. It was to allow them to stay at home. When people go on waiting lists, Mr. Speaker, for a nursing home, the family has thrown its arms up and they've said, we can't do it anymore. We just can't care for our loved one at home anymore. They need 24-hour care in a nursing home facility. To offer them financial assistance at that point, Mr. Speaker, is too late. Is way too late. The whole idea is to allow families to care for loved ones at home while they still can. Home care in Nova Scotia plays a large role in assisting families. But at the end of the day, home care is limited to so many hours a day. If the individual needs 20 hours of care, 12 hours of care, or 24 hours of care at home, home care is not there for those many hours. Someone has to be there outside of home care. And Mr. Speaker, in many ways, as I've mentioned before, these caregivers have been women. Now, why do I say that's relevant? Because what happens is that these women leave the workforce to care for loved ones. And what are the repercussions? They stop paying into the Canada Pension Plan. They stop paying into any sort of pension plan they may have had through their employment. They stop receiving benefits. And when they retire, that's where it all comes home to roost. And what a shame that we have women or males, whatever they might be, who leave the workforce to care for their loved one at home, and yet at the end of the day when they retire, they are punished for doing so. But that is the reality. So the question becomes, what can we as legislators and what can the provincial government do to help them and at least provide them some financial assistance? Now, Mr. Speaker, the intent of the program was to provide between $400 to $500 a month. Now, that's not a lot of money. And there's nobody that's saying, I'm not going to go work because I know if I stay home to care for my loved one, the government's going to send me a check for $400 or $500. But you don't know how many family members have said that little bit at least sends the message that the government recognizes that by keeping my loved one at home, I am saving taxpayers a tremendous amount of money. Plus, I'm allowing either my mom, my dad, my aunt, my uncle, or my family member to stay at home and live where they want to live and not have to go to a nursing home. So the pilot project, Mr. Speaker, was not an overall success. But the government has not given up, which I'm very pleased that they have not given up, because they've announced in this budget that they are going to continue the pilot project. I believe, in fact, there is another area of the province which has been added. The Annapolis Valley has been added to pilot project. But some of the other changes as well is that the program moves from community services to the Department of Health. This is not a criticism of the Department of Community Services. I know that the Deputy Minister and her staff did everything they could under a very short time frame to make this program, this pilot project, a reality. Unfortunately, I don't think the program probably should have ever gone to community services. But in the rush, that's where it ended up. Because I always saw the program as being a supplement to home care. And home care falls under the Department of Health. Some of the concerns that have been raised with this program by the current Minister of Service, Nova Scotia Municipal Relations, when he was Minister, by the previous Minister of Health, the Honourable Jane Purvis, when she was Minister of Health, was that if family members are being paid this money to care for a loved one, there could be abuse. They may not be caring for the loved one, they may just be taking the money and not even doing that. So that's a legitimate concern. But I always like to look at the view that Nova Scotians are honest people. Governments sometimes tend to look at the view that they're dishonest and we have to make sure to catch them from being dishonest. And that's unfortunate, but that tends to be a system of government at times. But with home care, if a family is receiving home care services and they are part of this new Support for Seniors program, pilot project, if the individual receiving the money as a caregiver is not present, is gone to Alberta, gone to Ontario, or is not doing their job, the home care workers will see that. So there are checks and balances in place, and I believe the Department of Health is the appropriate department for that. And I've already spoken to the Minister, and I've asked to meet with his officials to talk about this program. Because one of the other major flaws when the pilot project was announced, Mr. Speaker, was that the funds would be paid directly to the senior, or to the loved one who was receiving care. Now, Mr. Speaker, automatically, if you're going to pay the senior who's on pensions and that, any income they receive from the provincial government is going to be deducted from their supplement, which many seniors receive. Unfortunately, in Nova Scotia, we have a very high rate of seniors who receive the Canada Pension, the old age, and the supplement, which just provides you with a basic level of income. So any money, yes, true enough, which is over income as well for receiving housing grants, but I know the Minister of Community Services is working on that to try to change that, because that's too many families are being denied that in my own riding and in many other ridings. But, Mr. Speaker, for the government to say we're going to offer financial assistance and we're going to pay it directly to the individual who needs care, it's a taxable income. So it goes right into their pensions. And if with the Canada Supplement, the way it works, any additional income you make is directly deducted from your supplement. So if the government says we're going to give you $400 to help you pay for a caregiver, and the federal government's going to turn around and say, well, that's $400 of income, we're going to deduct that off your supplement, there's zero gain. And it makes the program useless because it hasn't achieved anything. And my point to the government has been, you need to allow the senior or the individual receiving care to appoint a caregiver. Because for the most part, as I mentioned before, these caregivers are women or they're men who are not working. So being they're not working, they're not earning enough income to pay income tax. But if we pay them $400 or $500 a month to care for a loved one at home, they are not going to make enough money to have to pay income tax to start off with. So there's no financial disincentive to these caregivers. It's only a reward. So I do hope that the Minister of Health, I know he's got a very big department, I know he's very busy in that department. They're almost absorbing 50% of the provincial budget, but 43%.
I wonder if the honourable member would allow an introduction.
Sure, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to draw the members' attention to the West Gallery, where we have some visitors with us tonight. They are young individuals from the 8th Sackville Scouting Group, and they're here with their leaders, Robin Mullen, Charlene Cardot, and Charles Robson. So if they could all rise, and we'll give you all a warm welcome.
Thank you. The Honourable member for Richmond has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and certainly it's a pleasure to see the visitors that we have here with us at the Legislature this evening as we discuss the Financial Measures Act and the legislative tool that is being used to implement many of the changes that are involved with the Financial Measures Act. And Mr. Speaker, one of the other changes, for example, in the Financial Measures Act talks about the costs for registering unlimited liability companies in Nova Scotia. Now, Mr. Speaker, this is something, a tool that has been used by a number of companies outside of Nova Scotia to register here because of our low fees and have been doing business here in Nova Scotia. Now, a couple of years ago, Speaker, the government thought that it was time to increase those fees, and they did so. But now they've seen that a number of other jurisdictions, I think primarily Alberta, has lowered their fees, and British Columbia have lowered their fees, and so suddenly we are no longer as competitive as what we were previously. So now, Mr. Speaker, the government has decided, and I believe rightfully so, to lower the fees, again, so that we can be competitive. And I don't remember the number offhand, but I think Nova Scotians would be surprised by how much revenue was generated by the registering of these unlimited liability companies in Nova Scotia. So this was basically revenue coming from business outside of our province. And again, any additional revenue, I'm sure the government is quite pleased to receive, and I'm sure that they're reinvesting it in Nova Scotia, as we often hear the Minister of Transportation tell us that he's doing with the high gas prices and high motor fuel prices here in our province. Speaker, as well, when you talk about the Financial Measures Act, you need to really talk about the budget as well, because one goes with the other. And as I mentioned in my opening comments, making a decision as to whether to support a budget or not is never an easy one. And Mr. Speaker, one of the elements as well in the Financial Measures Act and through the budget is where the government has made a change on the HST rebate, or the provincial portion of the HST on home heating fuel and home heating electricity. Now, Mr. Speaker, again, we were the only caucus. We were the only caucus in 2006 that said this was not the right way to go. The only one. The only one brave enough and that showed the courage and the leadership to say it was not the right way to go. Giving an 8% reduction was something that we felt at the time was completely abandoning the fact that many low-income Nova Scotians would not see the same level of benefit with this reduction that they were seeing under the old Keep the Heat program. But
Mr. Speaker, the NDP continued to pursue this, even though we indicated to them that they had to realize that when you take this, when you go across the board and reduce this 8%, not only the average Nova Scotia is benefiting, people of very well financial means are benefiting as well. And is that who we felt really needed assistance at times of high fuel prices in Nova Scotia? So, Speaker, electricity as well. Who was benefiting from this reduction? Was it low-income Nova Scotians? Were they seeing the savings that they needed to see? Mr. Speaker, I remember when the Keep the Heat program first came out, it offered $250 to low-income Nova Scotians. And at the time, Mr. Speaker, the federal Liberal government said, we will match that. And they sent out $250. So you had $500 coming to low-income Nova Scotians. That, Mr. Speaker, certainly. Well, the honourable member from Halifax-Needham said it went to dead people, but it went to a lot of living people that needed that money, that are not getting that money today, Mr. Speaker. And they're trying to make ends meet because they can't afford to pay their heating bills. And that member should know that, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. The Honourable Member for Halifax-Needham.
On a point of order, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think the record should reflect that I said the federal Liberal government also sent their rebate to a lot of dead people and people in prison, Mr. Speaker. And that's a fact that's on the record, Mr. Speaker.
I don't believe that's a point of order, but the Honourable Member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, you can't speak out of both sides of your mouth and in one sense say that you're concerned about the poor, yet on the other sense, when you know the poor are clearly not going to benefit from the program they were advocating and we're doing better under an old program, it is dishonest to stand in this House and talk about poverty or cry about poverty when they know that they are hurting Nova Scotia families that cannot make ends meet. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, it was time to revamp this program and finally put the money where the money belonged, in the pockets of low-income Nova Scotians that needed it the most.
Order. The Honourable Member for Halifax-Needham.
Mr. Speaker, on another point of order. Mr. Speaker, I believe that dishonest is unparliamentary, and I would ask the honourable member to retract that statement.
The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, I'm here in my place today after 10 years of service to call a spade, and I believe what the NDP did was dishonest by saying that they were pushing for a program to help low-income Nova Scotians that they knew was not going to achieve that. And Mr. Speaker, it's not the first time I've accused that party of that, and it will not be the last time. Because when they stand in this place and they talk about the need to address poverty issues, yet they continue to advocate a program which they knew was not going to help low-income Nova Scotians, and yet today they now stand.
I would request the member to take back the statement about dishonest. The member from Halifax-Needham is correct.
So, Mr. Speaker, I guess you can quote from Beauchesne or any other authority that does list that word as being, because that word's been used very often.
You're challenging this?
Not at all, Mr. Speaker. I'm simply asking for where it's listed.
And I'm asking you to withdraw that comment.
Mr. Speaker, I will retract that statement. We'll certainly ask in the future at a later date if you could be able to identify, because that word has certainly been used in here before. In fact, I've heard the members of the NDP accuse the government of that many times before, but I will retract that for the time being.
Thank you.
Speaker, I don't believe it was truthful for the NDP, and for that member from Halifax-Needham to stand in her place and to chastise myself or chastise any members of this caucus for not supporting the poor when it was we who advocated for a program that would better benefit the poor. And the government has finally taken steps to restore a program that will put money back into the pockets of low-income Nova Scotians, and they have seen the fact that the 8% rebate across the board did not, in fact, help those who needed it most in making ends meet here in this province. And Mr. Speaker, it was untruthful then, it is untruthful today to have been pursuing that. And she can rise on all the points of order she wants, Mr. Speaker. I believe her own embarrassment of what her party has been pursuing and how they've been proven wrong. But rather than say that they were wrong. They instead, after our caucus indicates that we'll be supporting the budget, lo and behold, the NDP are going to vote against the budget because it's a broken promise. A broken promise, they say, which they know today. The 8% rebate did not, in fact, help the low-income Nova Scotians that needed it most. And that's why we need to focus as legislators and as parliamentarians to see what can we do to help Nova Scotia families in the light of high gas prices, high home heating oil, high electricity, high food costs, high costs on education, everything else which is making it so difficult for Nova Scotia families. And we can't address all of their concerns. And we can't just wave a magic wand and make it perfect. Yes, true. And yet, while the NDP talks about it, they've yet to show us their magic wand. So maybe one day they will show it to us. But until such time, Mr. Speaker, the rest of us, responsible legislators, need to work with the reality that we face, need to work within the budget envelope that we have. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned before,
Order, please. The Honourable Member for Richmond has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I mentioned before, when one looks at the budget, for example, Mr. Speaker, because the Financial Measures Act really is a reflection of the budget, we all know the representations that were made regarding colorectal cancer screening in Nova Scotia. Our caucus was pleased that last year, in discussions with the government, they did agree to increase colorectal cancer screening in Nova Scotia. This budget will increase it even further. The numbers of Nova Scotia men, especially, who are dying from colorectal cancer are staggering. They're staggering. When one looks at the numbers, it is beyond belief that there's that many individuals, because unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, it is one of those cancers, while no one likes to talk about cancer, it is especially one that men do not talk about. And we do not hear the stories, and we do not hear the effect it's having on families. But the statistics are there. How could a party vote against an effort to increase colorectal screening in this province? And yet the drug that has been proven to increase the lifespan of individuals suffering from this terrible cancer, Avastin, that we have heard about, that the representations made by an individual who is no longer with us, who took up the cause, not that he needed it, he could pay for it. And he was very clear in saying that he had the financial means to pay for that drug. But how many people could not? And why is it that he, because of his financial needs, his financial means, should be able to pay for that drug and other Nova Scotians should be denied? And it was a difficult decision, but I commend the Minister of Health and the government for finally agreeing to fund the drug Avastin here in this province. Mr. Speaker, we await for the details of how this program is going to work, but clearly it is going to help Nova Scotia families at the end of the day. And we've already seen cases. I know of a family down in Guysborough which has been vocal in talking about the need for this drug, who've applauded the government and recognized that this is an important first step, and anything that we can do to help these families suffering from this terrible disease who do not have the financial means to be able to pay for this drug. The fact that the government now recognizes that it is important to provide such coverage, I think is something that needs to be recognized as well. So, Mr. Speaker, as I've said, the Financial Measures Act contains a number of provisions. It is not everything we'd like to see as a Liberal caucus, but certainly it does adopt a number of the initiatives which we have talked about, which we have indicated to the government is going to be in the best interest of Nova Scotians. The government has taken steps to adopt those. Our economy continues to grow, Mr. Speaker, and we're very blessed with that. I tend to tell my colleagues that the Conservatives have a horseshoe on their side because of the fact that since being in office every year, revenues have grown. They have never known a period where revenues have stopped or revenues have been in decline. And, you know, Mr. Speaker, back home, based on what the Minister of Labour and Environment, he encourages me to once again rephrase the line that I grew up with in my household, was that Tory times are hard times. And, Mr. Speaker, in many ways, they may have been, but as well, today, they could be a lot worse if our economy was not as strong as it is. And we look at what's happening in the United States, and we can only hope that the impact in this province will not be anywhere near the devastating impact it is having in that province. But, Mr. Speaker, the government continues to talk about balanced budgets, and that's an important message to give. But as well, I would remind them that I was here back in 1999 when the former Premier John Hamm in his Blue Book said that his government would not increase the debt of the province and would not put the burden on his grandchildren. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure he had the greatest intent in mind when he made those comments, but we all know at the end of the day, history shows they were untrue, and he was not able to keep that commitment. The debt of this province has grown, and the burden to his grandchildren, all of our grandchildren, will be there as a result. And we must never forget the burden that debt and how it is holding back our province. Because imagine, Mr. Speaker, the almost $1 billion a year we pay to service that debt if the government had that to spend on initiatives for Nova Scotians. If the Minister of Transportation was given $1 billion to spend, how many roads could be done? If the Minister of Health was given $1 billion, how many new beds, nursing home beds, emergency care room beds, how many more rural doctors he'd be able to attract, what he could do with $1 billion, what the Minister of Education could do for post-secondary students, for students, how many schools she could build in Glace Bay, for example, if she had $1 billion, Mr. Speaker. And he's only asking for one, but you'd still have whatever's left over at the $1 billion after one. Mr. Speaker, in all seriousness, we must never forget the debt. And I know that the Premier and his government has continued to talk about the balanced budgets, but we cannot forget that we have to find means of reducing that burden that faces all of us and that is holding us back. Because if we had that money available to us, what we would be able to achieve, Mr. Speaker, is wonderful things for our province. And we look with envy to Newfoundland at what they've been able to achieve with great fortune, with a luck of good natural resources, the revenues that are coming in now. Everyone wishes that province well. We'd like to see that same level of success here in Nova Scotia. The budget that has been presented does allow the government to address a number of priorities. There's many more that are facing Nova Scotians. Our party had a decision to make. Did Nova Scotians want an election right now, or did Nova Scotians want to see the minority legislature continue to work to the benefit of Nova Scotians? Mr. Speaker, our leader put aside politics, he put aside personal interest, and instead he said what is best for Nova Scotians, and I'm proud of his decision to support the government and to allow Nova Scotians to continue to move forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
If I recognize the minister, it'll be to close debate. The Honourable the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and I'm pleased to stand on my feet and to offer some comments in closing debate on Bill number 157, the Financial Measures Act. I want to thank the member from Richmond for his insightful comments on the positive attributes of the budget and the Financial Measures Act. I must say I was a little disappointed in the remarks of the financial critic from the NDP for his negativism. Mr. Speaker, you know, this is a budget which is targeted, it is strategic, and it's responsible, and it is balanced. And Mr. Speaker, you know, this is about priorities of Nova Scotians. And I'm just going to ask a couple questions. And I'm going to look at the official opposition when I say this. The NDP. I want to know how the member from Pictou West and the member from Pictou East.
Order, please.
Can possibly go back home and tell their constituents that they're voting for money that was going to be made available so young fishermen could get in the business and go after new species. You go home and you tell them that. I want the member from Pictou West to tell the people in Tony River and the people in River John and the people in Caribou and the people in Arisag. I want the member from Shelburne to tell the people in Clark's Harbour, Woods Harbour and Shag Harbour. And the member from Pictou East tell the people down in Arisag. You go, Lismore, you go tell the people that you aren't supporting the fishermen in your constituencies. I want the member from Halifax Citadel, who has 4 universities and a big healthcare sector to tell the university students you are not supporting them. You stand up and you tell the university students you don't want them to have their tuition back to the national average. You don't want a needs-based bursary. You go back home and you tell your students that, Mr. Member from Halifax Citadel. You cannot do it. You'll be ashamed. You know what you do? You're going to be a statistic in the next election if you don't vote for the budget and the Financial Measures Act. Mr. Speaker, and the member from Halifax, Needham, would stand up and
Order,
say she
please.
does not support giving more money to help the energy needs of those who are of low income. She stood in the House tonight, Mr. Speaker, and said that. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased that the Liberal Party is putting the people ahead of politics. But, Mr. Speaker, I would not want to be the members in that House to go back home and say that I'm not voting for more doctors, more money for nurses. Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to support tax credits for firefighters, tax credits for ground search, because, Mr. Speaker, when they vote against the Financial Measures Act and the budget, that's exactly what they're doing. Mr. Speaker, they're interested in politics and not the people. With those comments, Mr. Speaker, I ask for the vote on second reading Bill number 157.
Order, please. Order. The question is for second reading of Bill 157. Is the host ready for the question? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Against? The ayes have it.
Bill 157, entitled An Act Respecting Certain Financial Measures.
Order that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable the Government Deputy House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could I get consent to the House, please, to revert back to the order of business, presenting reports of committees?
Is it agreed?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Chairman of Law Amendments Committee, I'm directed to report the committee has met and considered the following bills. Bill 107, an act respecting the Nova Scotia Agricultural College. And Bill number 121, an act to amend Chapter 23 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Assessment Act. Bill number 117, an act to amend Chapter 418 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Securities Act. Bill number 123, an act to amend Chapter 376 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Public Service Act respecting seniors. Bill number 125, an act to amend Chapter 376 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Public Service Act respecting labor and workforce development. Bill number 135, an act to amend Chapter 300 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Municipal Elections Act. Bill number 144, an act to amend Chapter 20 of the Acts of 1990, the Nova Scotia Film Development Corporation Act, and Bill number 146, an act to amend Chapter 293 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Motor Vehicle Act. The committee recommends these bills to the favorable consideration of the House. Actually, Mr. Speaker, a correction on that. The first two bills presented would be the committee recommends these bills to the favorable consideration of the House with certain amendments. The last bills from 117, 123, 125, 135, and 144, and 146, the committee would recommend these bills to the favorable consideration of the House without amendments.
Order that these bills be referred to the Committee of the Whole House on Bills. The Honourable the Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This concludes the government's business for today.
The Honourable the House Leader for the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we will, after question period tomorrow, we will be calling Bill 58, the Uranium Mining Moratorium Act, and Bill 136, the Energy Resources Conservation Act. And I believe that those hours will be from noon till 4, and I believe the Government Deputy House Minister has hours beyond that.
The Honourable the Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and we would continue from 4 p.m. to 9 p.m., where government business would be following the opposition business would be moving into Committee of the Whole House on Supply unto Her Majesty, and from there, time permitting, the following bills. Public bills for second reading, Bill number 120, 126, 127, 130, 131, 133, 148, 151, 156, 163, 167, and 168. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The question is for the House to sit from 12 noon tomorrow till 9 p.m. Are you ready for the question? All in favor? Aye. Motion is carried. The House will meet at 12 noon tomorrow.